Hello everybody and welcome to Microsoft Ignite 2019. We are in the podcast booth area, booth number 4. We have 4 people in the room. I'm Warren DeToy and I'm with my co-hosts
Nicholas Blank,
Chris Goosen.
And today we have a very special guest and we have a contentious subject. We say the words it's an acronym. The words Amazon Web Services. And we're here with Mike Pfeiffer. Mike, what's happening?
What's up, you guys? I'm super pumped to be here. Really appreciate you guys having me on. And hope you guys are having a great conference so far.
Oh, yeah.
It's going to be awesome.
Today has been crazy.
My feet are already sore, and it's like day one.
It is day one.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you're going to need to take next week off probably to recover.
I wish.
That
Yeah,
is the
right?
truth, right?
Oh,
Wait,
yeah.
I was waiting for you guys to laugh at that.
No, but it's actually true, and we're back together again too, right? It's been a good, I don't know, like 6 or 7 months since we were actually like in the same room. Yeah, actually, we did shoot some, record some at Summit, so we were kind of recording some Summit.
You're right. Yes,
but it's always good when we're back together. So yeah, but we're really pleased to have you on the show, and let's get sort of an introduction rolling here. So you have a particularly interesting, I guess, history and background in tech and what you've been doing over the last few years. And we've known each other for a while. Mm-hmm. We were just talking, we hadn't seen each other in probably 6 or 7 years, so time goes by so quickly. But, give the folks at home a rundown of who you are and what you do.
Sure. Yeah, so, I started 20 years ago. Started in the late 90s, and I was basically just a kid living in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I was not a computer science major. Actually dropped out of college a couple times, and when I was living in Albuquerque, I got lucky and got a help desk job that I was not qualified for.
Yeah.
My first phone job ever was America Online. Remember the old school AOL, dial-up? So that was kind of the early kind of entry point into tech. But
that's when they designed the web interface for AWS.
Right, yeah. It's like the backbone, right, of everything they've ever done. But that was a cool, kind of experience for me to break into an emerging industry. The internet was starting to take off, and, Microsoft was starting to take over client-server networking. At the time, NetWare owned kind of like the server side, right, and it was a different world, but I was lucky enough to get in. I got obsessed with technology at that point, and, I've always kind of had to elbow my way in because, or at least that's what I felt in that era, right?
Yeah.
Because I wasn't a college graduate and I wasn't a computer science expert, but I was passionate, and I think for me, like, that's been the reoccurring theme in my career. I'm always trying to learn the next thing, and I think that's if you look at my past, that's kind of what I've done. I've never worked anywhere for longer than 3.5 years. After the first couple of years of doing help desk, I went into IT consulting, because certifications propelled me into, being an MCSE and being able to play that game. And then I spent a couple years as a .NET web developer, which was interesting. And I quickly learned that writing code is fun, but it's not something I want to do 40 hours a week.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I went back to infrastructure, and I've been kind of playing both ever since. And you guys know me well from the Exchange world. And so when I was doing
That's how we do know you from the Exchange world.
Yeah.
As the Exchange guy. So
yes.
Knowing you as an Exchange guy, I'm surprised that you have this coding background.
Yeah, I think that for me, it's just my personal interest in it. I know it's not for everybody, and that's cool, you know what I mean? But I was always fascinated with web development. Even in the late 90s, I tried to build websites when I was doing the help desk stuff, and I always just did that on the side. And it ended up being, something I did for 2 years professionally. Excuse me. And then after that, I was like, all right, I don't want to do this 40 hours a week. I just wanted to kind of be a side hustle, and that's what I did. And so when I got back into infrastructure after doing a couple years of .NET web development, in the very early days of .NET, really right after it came out, I noticed that every customer that I was working with had Exchange servers.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's an interesting angle for me. And so I pushed the chips into the table, and I was like, this is what I'm going to focus on. But as you guys know, that takes you into AD, and lots of infrastructure, lots of architecture, and really everything, right? You get sucked into everything, networking, security, performance, all that stuff. So I really enjoyed that, and I think that set me up for what I'm doing today, which, in 2012, 2013, I left Microsoft, I went to work at AWS, and I've been just strictly doing cloud ever since. And it's been kind of like, amplified my career another time. And so that's kind of my backstory. And today I run a company called cloudskills.io. have a podcast of my own called cloudskills.fm. And, I'm just working with customers on Azure and AWS projects, hoping to add in some Google stuff next year. That was something I wanted to do this year. Didn't happen. So that's kind of how I came up in the industry, and that's what I'm working on today.
Let me ask, where did the Amazon experience come from? Because you were traditionally a Microsoft guy.
Yes.
So was it customer demand, or how did that happen?
So and I never told this story before, so I'm excited that you asked that because I've never gotten into it with anybody. But so there was a guy at AWS. His name was Ulf Schuh, and he was a 20-year Microsoft veteran. He's like a principal program manager. He went over to AWS as a solutions architect. This must have been 2011 or something. And he was just a regular SA, helping people with cloud projects. But he started building solutions, white papers with a infrastructure template, package it all up, give it to the customers. That got really famous within the Amazon world. And he spent a couple years building a bunch more. And it became so popular that AWS was like, let's build a team to do this. Let's get a bunch of people. Let's make a big effort, push this up. So he was Microsoft focused, right? So his, Ulf's kind of thing was, how do you run Windows Server on AWS? How do you run Microsoft SQL? How do you do SharePoint? How do you do Exchange? And he was the guy that was saying, here's how you do it, because he understood the AWS side. He was a real good Microsoft expert, and so he closed that gap. But what happened was, once he got tapped on the shoulder to go up to the senior leadership at AWS, there was an opening. And so I took his job. We built a team, and that team is still going to this day. It's AWS Quick Start. And there's hundreds, or I don't know if it's hundreds, dozens, tons and tons of reference architectures of just common enterprise workloads. Everything's kind of packaged up real nice together. Good architectural guidance, some automation. It's just a nice solution. And so it's very much like Azure Quick Start, which I loved when they came out with that after we created AWS Quick Start, because it's kind of validating that, hey, we're doing something that people like. But that was my in. And I think for me, honestly, probably one of the biggest things going through the interview process was when the hiring manager saw that I'd written a PowerShell book, which was Exchange related, actually. He's like, man, you wrote a book on PowerShell? And that wasn't just a free pass to get in, because I don't know if you guys are aware of the Amazon interview style.
No.
It's pretty hard. So it's like, they do multiple phone screens, and then you have an interview loop, an all-day interview with like 6-7 different people from different groups inside the company. And they beat you up pretty good and make sure you're culture fit. And if you're not, they send you packing. And I know lots of people that were qualified that didn't get in just because of that whole process. So you could be awesome and still not make it in because of lots of variables. Sometimes they're not just technical, right? So anyways, it's not easy to get in. So I got lucky, I think, having that experience. Maybe not lucky, but that was a good positioning play for me. I was a PowerShell expert, and they knew that they needed help with automation, mainly in the Microsoft space. And so that got me in the door. And then once I was in the door, learned AWS and just started geeking out on it. So that's how I kind of transitioned out of Microsoft stuff. I mean, still do Microsoft stuff all the time, but that's how I got out of traditional Microsoft infrastructure, which I was doing 15 years before that, basically.
You see, that's the word you're using there, and it's like traditional, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So I see this happening quite a bit, is you've got these diehard open source dudes that will only use AWS.
Right.
Okay. Even though Microsoft is the #1 open source contributor on the planet,
yes,
they ignore this fact. And you've got this sort of cult, almost hippie following behind AWS and what it stands for, even the names they use and those kinds of things, which guys are very, very attracted to. And because of that, they sort of won't sort of shift their mentality to the Microsoft way.
Except
do you find
with
that
Visual
it works?
Studio Code. Right? They're all on Visual Studio Code.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, really?
No, for sure. I mean, code has taken over. But, it's an Electron app, and you can run it in Linux, and life is good. So it's more like a... when you have your clients, and your clients are saying, look, we want a strategy of some sort, whether it's multi-cloud or not, how do you normally break that gap? How do you normally get past that? How do you show them the Azure light or show them the AWS light? Because obviously, let's try to remain neutral.
Sure.
Or should you, right?
Well,
and I think that's the reason we're here.
Yeah.
I would say yes, and that's how I handle it with our customers. I don't go in there and presume that Azure is the best play for them, because it might not be.
Yeah.
Their team may be experienced with Linux only and have zero Microsoft background, but that's just one variable. Maybe they're trying to move a SharePoint farm into the cloud, right? On traditional VMs, there's traditional again, but you know what I mean? Maybe they're trying to take something from a Microsoft space that's a better fit in Azure. Maybe they're trying to do something very, progressive with Active Directory and identity, right? And like obviously Azure is going to be a better play for that. So I'm always trying to gauge like how we set them up for success and not play politics. I don't care if they pick one over the other, if it makes sense based on the skills that they have, based on the team, based on the goals going forward. I don't try to get religious about it, and I won't work with customers that are, I generally don't have a problem with it, but if I had a customer push back on my recommendations that much, I'd be like, well, what are you hiring me for then?
Yeah.
Right, and I have no problem at this point being picky with who I work with. That's why I run a small company.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to build a Microsoft partner that's, doing all this crazy stuff. It's more about me being able to do the projects I want to work on and actually add value. So for me, that's the measuring stick is, does it make sense for the company? Can they even pull it off?
Yeah.
Because just because I'm telling them what to do doesn't mean their team's going to be able to do it. And that's a variable that you got to think about. So that's kind of how I try to gauge it. And what I've noticed is that, people are kicking the tires a lot on both.
Oh, yes.
And then that helps them gain context and then make a decision. So I haven't had too many yet that are religious about it, but that's kind of how I handle it. And when there's a bias, that's how those are the things that I kind of push against.
So the question I have is, are there situations that make sense to have both, right? Because so the trend that I've seen with the customers I work with is there is a little bit of that religious, like, oh, well, we're a Microsoft shop, so we're going to go down the Azure path, or, AWS, maybe they've been doing it a little longer in terms of cloud adoption. But then there's also situations like mergers and acquisitions where you've bought a company that is now fully AWS and you're on Azure. Do you need to go and take all that stuff and just shift it, or are there scenarios where multi-cloud works or even makes sense for a customer? Or is it very largely dependent on what it is they're doing?
I think it is. I think it's 100% dependent on what they're doing. I don't think multi-cloud just for the sake of it makes any sense.
Like a risk mitigation exercise or even a commercial pressure exercise.
And that's what I was going to go with that, right? Is that
absolutely.
I've had customers say to me that we're exploring both options because we don't want to put all our eggs in one basket.
Or be locked
but
in.
let's be honest, this is a very big basket, right?
Yes.
And the basket has a lot of safeguards and some mitigations built into it. So does that argument even make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the way I look at it is this, you don't need to go multi-cloud until you've gotten good with one. So if you're not good yet with the one, which most companies aren't at this point, I don't know about you guys as customers, but none of the ones I work with are, phenomenal at cloud.
What does that mean to be good?
Well, number one, not to overspend. Every customer that I go in and work with, they need help, and that's totally makes sense, but they're all overspending. Right, and so until you've got that figured out, don't go off and do another cloud.
It's definitely a different mindset, right? Like even in the productivity arena, where historically you built an Exchange server and you paid for the hardware that it was living on, and you just spin up mailboxes as you want. You don't care, right? So similarly, if you have this virtual environment or VMware infrastructure where you're just burning VMs up all the time, who cares? It's a VM, right?
So
but in the cloud, you can't do that because every time you do that, there's the dollars are just going shing, shing.
Yeah, you're hearing dollar signs.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah, it's so true. I remember the first company I ever helped set up VMware for. This is like 2007. They were all physical servers, right? And they push back against VMs. It's history repeating itself, right? We set up clusters of virtual machine or vSphere clusters and all that stuff, right? Next thing you know, like 500 VMs for a place that has 500 employees, right?
Yes.
And so just to your point, like once you have that thing, you start spinning stuff up. But that's, the cloud is the equalizer. Like you get caught immediately in the cloud.
Yes.
And so you just overspend. So, most customers that I've worked with are not operationally efficient yet at one cloud. And so until you are, going to a second one doesn't make sense because, let's face it, there's not great management tools that kind of cover everything, right?
Yes.
And you kind of need to have some kind of system. I think it's too early for people, like for 99% of businesses to be effective with multi-cloud. It's just, maybe if you're like storing offsite backups of one and doing everything else in another one, but like literally spanning an architecture across both clouds. I mean,
yes.
I don't even know who would do that. Netflix, maybe? Like, most people aren't going to be able to pull it off at this stage based on the resources they have available to them. And so multi-cloud, to me, is like way too early of a conversation for most customers.
Well, you mentioned the friction there is cost or cost management and operational management. Then let's assume we're good. Let's assume you've got a traditional AWS customer, okay, and they kicked the tires on IaaS and they became more mature and followed a services model before infrastructure eventually. So we've got the whole app modernization story going, right? Why would they consider Azure? Or why would a mature Azure customer consider Amazon?
I love this question because 3 years, if you would have asked me this, I would have said for sure, like, everybody should go to AWS if they're going to do production workloads, and I don't feel like that anymore. I think right now what's happening is Microsoft's doing a really great job with governance and policy and role-based access controls and all of these things that we basically got with Active Directory, and you're going to get that now in Azure. That's going to change the game. Like, once Azure policy is like, a little bit further ahead from where it is now, I'm not saying it's not good enough, just saying once it's even more in depth, like, enterprises are just going to flock to it because they already got AD anyways. But I think long term, you mentioned AWS was early, right? That helped them in the beginning, but they haven't been building software since 1975. Microsoft has, and that matters.
It does.
And so, like, it's gonna catch up. Like, they're gonna close the gap, and in my view, based on what I'm seeing and all the services and stuff, they're probably gonna pass AWS at some point. That's my view right now.
Is it fair to say that from a management and governance point of view they have, and I'm going to pick on Portal, there's one, right? As opposed to, I have a storage console, I have a network console, I have an IaaS console. I have all these different consoles, and I have different entry points in different languages for different things. In Azure, arguably, I've got one portal and one language.
Right. Yeah, that's gonna really help Microsoft. Microsoft's awesome at building management tools. They always have been. They're awesome at building user interfaces. Like I said, that's going to catch up. That's going to matter. If you look at what AWS is doing in their developer tools teams, right? If you look at their builder tools, it's like 9 different services, like all the CI/CD stuff, even their command line interface stuff. It's not even close right now to where Microsoft stuff is. And so, yeah, AWS was early on virtual machines and like object storage and things like that. But they weren't early on most of the other stuff. Like, they've only been building software since 1995 or whatever. So, again, I think that's going to make a big difference. And I think that's going to be what sends Microsoft over the top going forward. And like I said before, most people right now have Active Directory in the enterprise space. AWS got a lot of traction in the early days from startups and non-enterprise type companies. And they've been trying to win the enterprise over the last couple of years. They've done a decent job. But management tools matter. Tooling matters. Like, if you just look at their developer tooling, it's Visual Studio Code, and it's good. And it helps people get the job done. And having multiple consoles is one that is a definitely pain point.
And it's strange, right? Because when you think about the history of Amazon, okay, and you look back at Jeff Bezos and he said, I need you to make the least amount of clicks for somebody to purchase something. Okay. And the guys came back and they tried for, I think it was 12 months or whatever the story goes, and they got it down to 12 clicks to get somebody out the door, credit card, the works. He said, no, it's not enough. One click and you can buy something. Now Amazon, you can. One click and you've got it bought. So you take the same principle and apply it to deploying a virtual machine. Or am I not seeing this correctly?
Well, and that's an interesting point, right? Because Amazon's culture is customer obsession first. That's their guiding principle. Microsoft could arguably be called that, but that's not their core guiding principle. They're competitor obsessed, right? Lotus Notes, right? NetWare.
Yep.
Like, they're always looking at what works and then like taking it to the next level. Amazon's good at like focusing on customer experience. So in your point of retail, one-click checkout, cool. But if I'm an infrastructure person, that's what was good about EC, or it's still what's good about EC2, right? Is you can go deep. And as an infrastructure person, like if I'm thinking about being customer obsessed to an infrastructure person, I want to give them all the bells and whistles that I could come up with. But I think we're getting to the point now where it's like, it's just a lot, right? Yeah. It's a lot of information, and now we're getting to the scale issue where it's like, how do you manage all this stuff? Now it's starting to grow, and it's an interesting time.
And I think you made a good point, or an interesting point about the traction that Amazon gained early on was with these sort of hip startup companies or companies who were not necessarily enterprise, right? Because they had developers who were potentially building stuff, and they didn't mind having a platform that they could build their own stuff on, right? Now I had a customer, they're still a customer, I guess, who they were on Google for the longest period of time. And they absolutely loved it because it wasn't polished for them, right? They had the service, they got their email and whatever they needed, but all of the integration that they had, or all of the provisioning, deprovisioning, all of that stuff was custom built by them. They built their own stuff on Rails to do that because they could plug into all the APIs. It was really sexy when you looked at it and you thought, man, this is great that you have a whole in-house development team that can build the provisioning portal that you need. But most customers don't have that, right?
Not at all.
And I kind of see AWS being similar to that, in that if you have the know-how and the knowledge to be able to go, I want to build a platform that provisions machines for myself. I don't care what your interface looks like. I'm going to redo it myself anyway. You have access to all of those APIs and all of that kind of stuff, and you can go have at it. Yeah. Whereas Microsoft is saying, we like to wrap it in a really pretty bow for you, so that you don't have to worry about the management piece.
It's a good point. I mean, it's really true. I believe that Amazon's stuff is deep because of that purpose, right? They want to give those hardcore customers the tools and services they need, but it could be a huge hill to climb for most enterprises, especially when they're not super experienced.
Just define that for us. So we understand, for example, if we're looking at a virtual machine, I'm going to argue, and Warren's going to correct me, that if I'm going to look at what level of control I have, once I go down to the resource template, there's not much I can't do, right? So what do I lose in Azure versus EC2?
I think that we're getting to the point now where there's not much, right? Like there was a long time where there was a lot you could do in EC2. For a long time, there was a lot you could do in EC2 that you couldn't do in Azure Virtual Machines, but that's starting to change. And so I've been impressed with what Microsoft's doing with virtual machines. Like they've added a lot of management capabilities and stuff like that. I think one place where they've closed the gap recently is like with the image marketplace and maybe the image capture process. So I got a lot of customers that still, I mean, we pretty much work on deployment automation.
Yeah,
I'm still doing
it wasn't very
stuff.
easy.
It was definitely not easy. And I mean, it's still, could use some spit and polish. AWS's experience for that's just one small place where EC2 is really slick. The ability to like create copies of your virtual machine or create images, copy those images around easily the different regions and stuff. There's things like that, like under the hood that are really good. Well, Microsoft will get there. So I would say right now there's not a huge thing for me. I think there's a big difference where I would say, oh, EC2 is so much better over here. Auto scaling in EC2 is pretty slick because it's been around so long. It works really well. It's fast. So I think if you're thinking about auto scaling virtual machines, probably right now, AWS auto scaling in EC2 is probably a little bit more mature than virtual machine scale sets in Azure. But I don't think it's going to be long before Microsoft is competing in every single category in virtual machines just as good as EC2. I mean, there's not that big a difference at this point.
But then I guess if you think about it, we can always turn it around. Okay, so take your question and flip it around. So you can go deeper into EC2. You have more customization on specific pieces. However, that also leaves more opportunity for mistake.
Yeah.
Right, so let's say provisioning a virtual network of some sort, let's say in Azure. Azure's going to say to you, we're locking this stuff down for a reason. There's something that you can't get to because of X, Y, Z. So Amazon, would Amazon do the same thing based on that principle? So the idea is, Microsoft's giving you guardrails so that you don't have a problem later on. I mean, ideally, your security, your edge now lies with identity. I mean, in some way, shape, or form, it's identity. You know, your databases are on the cloud, they are publicly accessible, and so the person then becomes your edge, the person who's consuming your product, okay? And the old traditional firewall, port blocking, whatever the case may be. And so, from an Amazon perspective, how do you maintain that identity? As opposed to in Azure, when you know exactly what that identity is. That identity is uniform across the grid.
I'm going to argue that the killer application for Azure is Azure AD.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it is the ultimate like upper hand that Microsoft has right now.
Yeah.
100%.
And compliance-wise, I mean, like, I don't know how many certifications Amazon does.
Amazon's got tons and tons of compliance certifications. They do really good there. You know, but I think what Nicholas was saying is spot on. I mean, Azure AD, that's a big difference. Azure policy is going to be a big difference. Like, imagine 18 months from now what you're going to be able to do with Azure policy that you won't be able to do at all in AWS. That's going to matter big time.
But you're seeing it already. I mean, you've already got a really bunch of angry devs at the moment because they can't do things in Azure because policy is stopping them from doing it. Yeah. Which is great, because they shouldn't have access in the first place.
Correct. But here's the thing that I'll push back on, that, well, at least to make sure I'm clear on with that, because I fight this battle all the time. You can't not give them access. You can't not give developers access to the cloud and then expect them to understand what's going on in production. You should give them a sandbox that they, you know, their own subscription where they can go in, and you need to empower them with the architectural diagram and everything, and templates, automation for the stuff we have in production, so they can at least, you know, if they can't bring it up in a dev environment, they can bring it up in their own environment and understand what's happening in production, because there's way too many companies right now that are just locking the devs out and expecting them to check code into a repository and have a release pipeline bring it into production, and they have no perspective on what they're supposed to be doing, or they don't even understand like the technologies involved. So I 100% agree, developers should not be touching production resources, and that's, you know, we have tight controls for that in almost every cloud we want to go into. However, like, the expectation of just thinking somebody's just going to magically know, like, or it's going to write good software when they don't know how the system or the platform works, that's just not going to play out. It's not going to work out.
Yep. The best practice around this from an Azure point of view is to have multiple subscriptions.
Yes. And
the dev subscription should be a free-for-all within reason, right? Because you don't want them to bankrupt the company.
That's right.
So there should be a financial constraint, but not necessarily an API constraint. And then with that, you've got QA, which is much more restrictive, and then you've got prod, which is super restrictive, right? So ideally, a developer should not be deploying or writing code into prod.
That's right.
Because your DevOps process should mature your code pipeline to deploy.
Your pipeline should be doing all of the work.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you've got all the controls in there. You've got all the policies. You know what's going on. You've got a history. You can go and see the audit trail. But yeah, and it's interesting too. In Microsoft shops, developers usually have an MSDN subscription. Yeah. So a lot of times they do have their own. But there's also lots of cases where I've gone in and, you know, the management is not allowing the team to test. You have to experiment in this world.
Yeah.
And if you don't have an experimentation culture, you're going to spend too much money.
That is an on-premises cultural mindset, if I can call it that. That my SAN's expensive, so, you know, don't do anything that's going to raise the IOPS. So, no, you can't play.
But what did you guys used to do when you were getting ready to go to the MCM before you would go up, right? Like, you guys would go in and build a huge farm or like a huge forest of VMs, and you would like beat the hell out of that thing before you ever showed up for class, right? And I mean, did the same thing. And so, like, we have to be able to do that, right?
And I still work like that, though, right? Like to me, it still is. I mock up environments all the time, and I think most people in my team think I'm just ancient because I have, you know, a massive VM lab that I built stuff on, because that's how you do it. You know, I had someone ask me to write a script for them the other day to do something, and I was like, yeah, but I don't have access to that thing, right? Like, I can write it for you, but I can't test it if I don't have access to that thing. It's a very difficult situation, and we see this all the time with Office 365, with customers wanting to bring up all these elaborate solutions in their production tenant. You're like, that's yes, you can be on different rings for the users to see what Microsoft are doing, but what if that integration you want to do, you should be doing that in some sort of test environment so that you can see what's going on. And it doesn't have to have 500 E3 licenses or 500 E5 licenses. You just need one or two of each just to see.
Yeah, people are overthinking some of that stuff. They're overthinking it, and they just need to experiment and have a learning culture and be open to change, because that's the game that we're all in, right? Especially now when you can just move so fast. So I think that's where a lot of companies that I'm working with are struggling. It's more a human issue, a behavioral thing, a culture thing, than it is a technology thing in a lot of cases.
Can we ask you to talk to the professional, the human, someone who is in the Amazon world and is considering the other cloud? Things are quite religious normally.
Yep.
So I'm either in the Amazon religion or the Azure religion. And
tell him to shave his beard and take a shower first, and then make the decision.
we just lost everyone who was listening to this podcast.
Sorry,
guys. And it's spoken by the one guy with a beard in the room.
That's the ironic part of it.
Yeah, and we got the applause in the background. Yeah. So let's talk to that professional. Bear in mind that you've got the developer experience to be able to talk to this topic. You've got the infrastructure experience. You've got the consulting and the management experience. You are an Amazon professional. How would you even consider retooling, or should you consider retooling towards Azure?
Well, here's the good news. If you're good with AWS right now, moving into Azure is going to be a lot easier than it is for someone that's brand new to cloud, because it's all the same stuff with different names.
Yep.
Right? And that's even to the point we were kind of talking before the show, talking about career transition and kind of moving from Exchange to the cloud. All of this stuff that we did in the Exchange world is stuff I started doing in AWS, like building VMs with volumes and networks spanned across different regions and doing DNS. All the stuff we've been working on was doing that in AWS. But so what I'm getting at is, number one, it's going to be an easier transition because you already know a lot of the patterns and practices.
Yeah, VM's a VM.
Yeah. Object storage is basically the same concept in AWS as it is in Azure, and so on, right? But the other thing that I would say to all that is, right now, if all you are is AWS, that is the biggest vulnerability for your career. Because I don't know about you guys, but I'm doing Azure and AWS, and I'm going to start doing Google, and I know that you guys are doing that too. Everybody's going to start doing that. So if you're sitting there by yourself just doing one, I think you're going to be screwed later when you want to have leverage in the job market to go pick the job that you want.
Yeah,
it's going to help you to know more than one.
Well, it's like virtualizing and not knowing VMware or not knowing Zen or not knowing Hyper-V.
Yeah. Yep.
I think that the days of a deep, solid professional are numbered. If you do networking and it's only Cisco, how relevant are you?
It's so true. I have a buddy that's a CCIE, a long-time IT guy like us, a couple decades, and he's like, dude, I'm becoming he's still doing the tech stuff, and he's like, man, they're turning me into a software engineer.
Well,
I'm learning
SDN.
Python, and
Yep.
And so, to your point, that's the direction this is going. So get on the bus, it's that's what I would say to somebody on AWS. Don't don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't be a one-trick pony, right? Because at some point, that's going to come back to haunt you a little bit, right? So you got to look and see what people are using. To me, that's why Google's interesting, not because I have a passion to go learn another cloud, but just because I need to be able to speak to it, because my customers are starting to ask about it. Otherwise, I'd ignore it.
Contentious question, do you think it's relevant, or do you think it's a me too?
Do I think Google's relevant?
Yeah, GCP.
I do, in the big data space especially, because they're good at that, and they've spent the last couple decades crushing it there.
Yeah.
So they got a lot of good tools and services in that space. And I think that for them, it's kind of like they have to be in that game, right? Because they're data center experts. They have to play that game to keep enabling their other parts of their business. They have to be good at building data centers and continue to be good at that. So I think they kind of have to. But I think there is an element of, we want to get in that game too.
Yeah.
And so I think it'll be interesting for people that are building applications. I think for enterprises that are moving, lifting, and shifting, and they're already on Microsoft, and it's going to take them a little bit longer. Obviously Azure is probably the best bet in most cases. And I don't see Google being, to me, something that I'm super interested in right now. I mean, I know that I need to understand that world, but I don't envision a time where I'm going to be telling my customers, you guys got to go to Google.
That's interesting. just because we are coming towards the top of the hour and we're going to be losing our venue.
Is that already this? Man, that goes by
Yeah,
fast.
yeah, that's right.
So I'll see you guys
It's
again
been
in
a
like
good
10
show.
minutes from now.
And the thing is, there's so much that you can unpack on this conversation
much.
and this
Totally.
topic, right?
Yeah.
I
So
could get going for a couple hours.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
should do a part 2.
we might have to do a part 2. Maybe we need to come on your show and do a part 2.
Oh, yeah.
Well, here's the thing. We can do that tomorrow if you guys want.
Cool.
So
We'd be keen.
We could talk about that, but
Sounds
yeah,
good.
I'm going to be recording a lot here this week. So
Let's just ask you. Can you do a plug for your show and anything else that you would like to blog?
yes,
Twitter account, LinkedIn, web URL, anything.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, so definitely check out my show, cloudskills.fm. So I'll have you guys on there, and we'll kind of do that. So I do a weekly podcast, and
How do you keep up the cadence on that?
you got to carve it out, right?
Okay.
Just like
All right.
it's got to go on the
Yeah.
calendar, and then
Yeah.
and I'm kind
do
of
it.
like that now because I've got so much going on in like business and life and stuff. Like everything's mapped out on my calendar.
Good.
I don't do that. I have somebody do that for me, and then whatever it says on my calendar, I do it.
Yeah.
And so that's how I'm able to stay weekly. I thought I was going to miss it last week, but it would have been the first time we didn't do since we started. We didn't do a weekly show, but I made it. I published on Friday, so it's not easy.
Well done.
Fantastic.
So that's something to check out. Cloudskills.fm. Just head over in a browser. You can find it on all the other, like iTunes or Apple Podcasts, whatever they're calling it these days. Cloudskills.io is my company. So we're 50% training, 50% consulting, and by the time you guys are listening to this, there'll probably be something new coming out that we have. So we've been running some immersive programs over the last year or so. Last year we did one where it was like a 6-week program. It was really inspired by Microsoft Certified Masters, right?
Yes.
And so, we basically, except for going to Redmond and then getting your ass kicked for 3 weeks straight, right?
Cool.
So it's more like jump on a Zoom call once a week for 4 hours.
Wow.
And then so it's cool. And then what happened is a few of those people in that program ended up co-authoring a book with Tim Warner and I. So we've got a book, AZ300 book coming out, Microsoft Press book coming out this month. So that was really cool. But anyways, we're doing another one of those, and I'm opening the doors in the end of this month, November. So it's going to be DevOps focused. So anybody that wants to get DevOps certified in Azure.
I'm trying to
That's
write
very
my
cool.
exam here, but the site's
Yeah.
just broken.
Yeah, so that's what we're doing. So cloudskills.io. If you go to the website and that's not up yet, just opt into our email list at the bottom of the page. Watch the CI/CD webinar that's on there. Then you'll get the emails when we go live.
Fantastic.
And I'll be pretty loud about it, but that's what we got going on. And so hoping to get a bunch of people certified. And then once we do Microsoft, we'll kind of pivot and do another one. We're going to do some Kubernetes stuff. It's going to be a lot of fun. So
Awesome.
Nice.
Wow,
Fantastic.
that sounds like something I want to check out for sure.
Yeah.
Just for my own personal
yeah,
interest.
and
but
that's one of the things we do in those programs. Like, it's not just me. Like, we've got all kinds of other people coming in that are experts teaching. This last run we did, we had guys like Dan Wallin, who's a Docker captain and Microsoft MVP, Steve Buchanan, who's another Microsoft MVP, a bunch of people, Tim Warner. So we had a lot of people come through, and that's kind of what we do. So I'm just kind of like an MCM, except it's not Microsoft people, it's
yeah,
Microsoft community folks.
that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you for your time, Mike. Really appreciate it. We've got a new segment that we're actually kind of kicking off here at Ignite as well. So something new to add to the show. So we're doing a community segment that we want to sort of start doing on every episode that we do. So whenever we publish every 2 or 3 or sometimes every month, depending on how we do it. We're not quite as disciplined as you getting it done every week. But really the idea here is to everyone listening is if you run a community event in your community, a meetup, or if you're putting on a Saturday event or anything like that, reach out to us via social. We'd love to get you on to sort of plug the event that you're doing. We've also got a great sponsor who's come on board to kind of sponsor the segment. So we're working with Enow Software. So Enow is a leading provider of Exchange, hybrid and Office 365 monitoring and reporting. Their solutions help customers manage over 550 million mailboxes. And they've got the stuff deployed in over 130 countries. So really, really cool stuff. Check them out. They're our sort of segment sponsor. And for today's segment, we're actually going to have Nick tell us a little bit about Cloud Friday.
Yeah, so Cloud Friday is something that I started because I was frustrated with traditional user groups. And I didn't want to go anywhere on a Tuesday night.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I'd
make
love to
it on a
just
Friday.
stay online, lay in bed naked, and just do that thing, right?
Well,
mean,
there was
maybe-
clothing involved,
Yeah.
and we decided to do this stuff in business hours. So effectively what
Teams.
we've done, we used Teams to glue 2 cities together.
Ah.
And so I've got myself in Cape Town, I've got Warren in Johannesburg, and we've got the Cape Town and Johannesburg Azure community. And
at both Microsofts.
At both Microsofts
And it's
or other venues. But Teams is the glue. And so we
got it.
co-present topics across 2 cities, and then we keep the stuff in a Teams team. So whoever attends, physically or virtually, gets access to all of the content.
In the
we
team.
record everything. We make it pretty, and we publish on YouTube for now until stream catches up, and then we'll publish there. But for now, cloudfridays.co.za for our American audience is the place to go.
That's
and
awesome.
we meet every second Friday where we can. We are selfish. Over Christmas, we don't. So we'll kick off again in January, February.
Yeah.
Nice. I'll have to check that out, man. That's awesome.
Yeah. Also, what we've decided to be very intentional about is we've taken all the presentation material, we publish it in GitHub, and we're going to record the how-to and make it an open source.
Yeah, and demos and all that kind of stuff.
How to do this particular style of community, and open source it and give it away.
Oh, dude, that's awesome. That's really cool of you guys to do that. That's really cool.
Good deal.
And
Good job.
again, thank you everybody for listening to our podcast. As you remember, we are live at Microsoft Ignite, and Microsoft is giving away some Surface earbuds. And in order to enter, please go to https://aka.ms podcast sweepstakes. But please do remember that there is a capital P and a capital S in podcast sweepstakes. So again, aka.ms/podcast sweepstakes. Please do enter before the 15th of December 2019.
Mike, thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Really
Thanks,
had a
guys.
lot of fun here. Thanks a lot.
Woohoo!